What happens when a journalist who has spent a lifetime dismantling power sits across from someone who has mastered controlling the narrative? What happens when calm precision meets unshakable certainty, and neither side is willing to blink? That question hung in the air long before the cameras ever started rolling. It was a quiet Sunday evening, the kind where the world feels slower, softer, but inside Studio 3, nothing about the atmosphere was calm. The set had been stripped down to its essentials. No audience. No applause. No distractions. Just two chairs, facing each other under carefully diffused lighting that cast no shadows, because shadows hide things, and tonight, nothing was supposed to stay hidden. The air was cool, almost unnaturally so, a subtle trick used in studios to keep minds sharp and tempers contained. But even that couldn't suppress the tension building beneath the surface. Crew members moved with hushed urgency, adjusting lenses, checking audio levels, whispering final confirmations. There was a different kind of energy tonight, not excitement, not nerves, something heavier. Anticipation mixed with uncertainty. Because this wasn't just another interview. This was a collision. The door at the far end of the studio opened softly, but every head turned instantly. She entered like someone accustomed to being watched. Meghan Markle stepped into the room surrounded by a small orbit of people, handlers, advisors, voices murmuring last-minute reminders. Their movements were quick, precise, almost protective. A hand adjusted her sleeve. Another repositioned a strand of hair. Someone leaned in, whispering something too quiet to catch, but urgent enough to matter. Across the room, Anderson Cooper stood still, observing. Not staring. Not reacting. Just watching. 30 years of interviews had taught him something most people never learn: what happens before the first word is often more revealing than anything said after. He noted everything. The controlled movements. The curated calm. The slight delay before she stepped fully into the light. By the time her team retreated, leaving her alone in the center of the set, the silence felt thicker. She sat down. Not casually. Not stiffly. Perfectly. There was a practiced elegance in the way she settled into the chair, shoulders relaxed, chin slightly lifted, an image crafted to signal openness, but not vulnerability. Confidence, but not arrogance. Or at least, that was the intention. Anderson walked forward, his steps measured, his expression neutral but not cold. He took his seat opposite her, leaning in just slightly, not aggressive, just engaged. "Thank you for being here," he said, his voice calm, steady, familiar. "Thank you for having me," she replied, her tone smooth, controlled. Polished. But there was something beneath it. Something faint. A subtle edge that didn't quite match the warmth of her words. Anderson caught it. He always did. There was a brief pause, one of those quiet moments where both people are silently measuring each other. Not openly. Not obviously. But it was happening. "I want to set something clear before we begin," Anderson said gently, his tone unchanged, but his posture shifting just enough to signal intent. "I'll be asking questions. Some easy. Some not. My job is to understand. Your job is to answer." A small smile appeared on Meghan's face. "I'm always honest," she said. It was a simple statement. But something about it lingered in the air a second too long. Anderson nodded once. "Then we'll get along just fine." A producer's voice echoed softly from behind the cameras. "Rolling in 3, 2, silence. Then, we're live." The shift was immediate, but subtle. Anderson leaned forward slightly, his tone warming, easing into the conversation like a calm current. "Let's start with where you are now," he said. "You've built a life in California. New projects, new direction. How would you describe this chapter?" Meghan nodded, almost relieved. This was familiar territory. "This chapter," she began, her voice softening, "has been about freedom. For the first time in my life, I'm able to make my own choices. Live authentically. It's liberating. Her words flowed smoothly, each one placed carefully, like stepping stones across a river. Anderson listened. Really listened. Not just to the words, but to the rhythm behind them. Liberating from what? He asked. A small pause. From the institution. The expectations. The scrutiny. Anderson nodded again, as if considering it deeply. You mentioned scrutiny, he said. But you've arguably been more visible since leaving. Documentaries. Interviews. Public appearances. How do you reconcile wanting less scrutiny while increasing your platform? It was gentle. Polite. But it wasn't soft. For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Barely noticeable. But it was there. There's a difference, she replied. Between scrutiny and storytelling. I'm choosing to share my perspective. Anderson tilted his head slightly. But the outcome is the same, isn't it? People are still watching. Still analyzing. The only difference is control. Another pause. Longer this time. I consent to this, she said. And consent changes everything? Yes. Anderson leaned back slightly, just enough to create space. But it's still attention, he said quietly. Just, curated. The word hung there. Curated. For a brief moment, the room felt smaller. Warmer. More intense. Her fingers shifted slightly on the armrest. Not fidgeting, but adjusting. I think there's a clear distinction, she said. I think there's a subtle one, Anderson replied. Silence. Not empty silence. The kind that presses. The kind that forces thought. Then, he smiled lightly. Let's find out. Something about that line changed everything. It was almost invisible, the way the tone shifted. The warmth didn't disappear, but it sharpened. Focused. Like a lens adjusting. And in that moment, the interview truly began. The questions that followed weren't louder. They weren't aggressive. They were something far more dangerous. Precise. Each one placed carefully. Each follow-up slightly closer than the last. Not pushing, just narrowing the space. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the balance in the room began to change. What had started as a conversation, was becoming something else. Something tighter. Something harder to navigate. Something she hadn't fully anticipated. And as the seconds ticked by, as the calm voice across from her remained steady and unshaken, a realization began to form, just beneath the surface. This wasn't going to be the kind of interview she was used to. Not controlled. Not predictable. Not safe. And the moment that realization fully landed, everything shifted. But the real turning point, the moment where composure began to crack, hadn't happened yet. Not quite. But it was coming. And when it did, there would be no going back. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does. It began in the smallest possible way, so subtle that anyone watching casually might have missed it. A slight tightening around the eyes. A fraction of a second longer before answering. A smile that didn't quite reach where it used to. But inside that quiet studio, under those controlled lights, every micro-change mattered. Because Anderson Cooper had already seen it. He didn't interrupt. He didn't press harder, at least not yet. He simply adjusted. And that was enough. You've spoken openly about your struggles, he continued, his voice calm, almost empathetic. Isolation. Pressure. Mental health. Those are serious experiences. Meghan nodded, her posture still composed, but now more rigid than before. They are, she said. And you've attributed much of that to the institution. The environment. The system you entered. Another nod. Yes. A pause. Not long, but intentional. Anderson leaned forward slightly, his tone unchanged, but something underneath it had sharpened. But you chose that world. The sentence landed softly. Too softly. And that's what made it heavy. There was no accusation in his voice. No confrontation. Just reality. For the first time, Meghan didn't respond immediately. No one can fully understand what they're walking into, she said finally. That's true, Anderson replied, nodding. But most people don't enter that world without some understanding. You had access. Resources. Experience in public life. Her jaw shifted, just slightly. I was blindsided by the cruelty, she said. Anderson didn't challenge the word. He focused on something else. You've used that word before, he said gently. Cruelty. You've also mentioned racism. The air changed. Not dramatically. But enough. It was like the temperature dropped a degree, or maybe it just felt that way. Yes, she said, her tone cooling. Can you be specific? There it was. The first real edge. Not loud. Not aggressive. But unmistakable. A question that required more than a prepared answer. A question that demanded detail. And for the first time since the interview began. She hesitated. I've already shared my experience, she replied. I understand, Anderson said calmly. But this is a serious claim. You've suggested members of the royal family made comments about your child. That has global implications. Silence. Real silence this time. No movement from the crew. No sound from the equipment. Just the faint hum of studio lights. I'm not going to relive every moment, she said, her voice tighter now. I'm not asking for every moment, he replied. Just clarity. Another pause. Longer. More visible. I chose not to name the individual, she said. Anderson nodded slowly. So instead, everyone is left under suspicion. Her eyes flickered. I was trying to protect relationships. By accusing everyone, he asked softly. That was the first time it felt like a direct hit. Not because of how it was said. But because of what it implied. She shifted in her seat. That wasn't my intention. What was your intention? The question didn't rush her. It waited. And that's what made it difficult. Because now there was nowhere to go but forward. I wanted to speak my truth, she said. And avoid accountability for specifics? Anderson asked gently. Her composure cracked, just for a second. A flash of something sharper crossed her face. You're twisting this, she said. I'm clarifying it. No, you're doing what the press always does. Questioning credibility instead of listening. Anderson didn't react. Not outwardly. But his stillness became more pronounced. I'm doing what journalism requires, he said quietly. When someone makes a serious claim, we ask for details. That's not an attack. That's responsibility. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the chair. You have an agenda, she said. My agenda is clarity. The words were simple. But they didn't move. They didn't bend. And for the first time, the balance of control began to slip. The conversation moved on, but not really. Because the tension stayed. It lingered beneath every word that followed. Let's talk about your current life, Anderson said, shifting slightly. It sounded like a reset. But it wasn't. It was a transition. How are your projects going? A safer topic. On the surface. They're going well, she said quickly. We're doing meaningful work. Can you be specific? The same question. Different context. Same effect. We've produced content. Documentaries. A podcast, the podcast that ended after one season? Anderson asked. There it was again. Not aggressive. Just, precise. Her expression hardened. That was a creative decision. From your side, or theirs? A beat. Our visions didn't align. Anderson nodded. That happens, he said. Though usually after more than 12 episodes over 3 years. The number hung in the air. Tangible. Measurable. Unavoidable. We focused on quality, she replied. And quantity never became part of that equation. Her lips pressed together slightly. We were intentional. Most creators are, Anderson said. They're also consistent. That one landed differently. Because it wasn't a question. It was an observation. And observations are harder to deflect. The room felt smaller now. Tighter. Every word carried more weight. Every pause felt longer. And Netflix? Anderson continued. A flicker of hesitation. Projects evolve, she said. Some were cancelled, he replied calmly. Another hit. Soft. Accurate. Unavoidable. That's the industry. Or a pattern. Silence. A long one. The kind that stretches just enough to become uncomfortable. Her posture shifted again, this time more noticeably. Less composed. More defensive. I think you're being unfair, she said. Anderson leaned back slightly. Help me understand how. Another pause. Because now the burden had shifted. Now she had to explain. And that's when it became clear, the structure she'd relied on, wasn't holding. This isn't a conversation, she said. It's an interrogation. Anderson's expression didn't change. Which part felt like that, he asked. All of it. I asked about your experiences. Your claims. Your work. Those are the things you've made public. Her breathing had changed now. Subtle. But faster. You're framing everything negatively. I'm asking directly. No, you're implying things. Then clarify them. That was the moment. The exact moment. Where control slipped completely. Because now every response required something she wasn't prepared to give, specifics. Clarity. Accountability. And the more he stayed calm, the more it unraveled her. She stood up suddenly. Not slowly. Not gracefully. Suddenly. The chair shifted slightly behind her with a soft scrape that echoed louder than it should have. I think we're done here. The words landed like a break in the air. Behind the cameras, someone shifted. Not visibly, but you could feel it. That ripple of uncertainty. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. Anderson didn't stand. Not yet. He simply looked up at her. Calm. Steady. Curious. Which question ended it, he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Because there wasn't one. And they both knew it. This isn't fair, she said. What would be fair, he asked quietly. No response. Only silence. Thick. Uncomfortable. Final. And in that silence, the realization settled in. Not just for her. But for everyone watching. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was something else entirely. Something raw. Something unscripted. Something that couldn't be controlled. And as she turned toward the door, one hand tightening around her bag. One breath held just a little too long. It became clear, the ending wasn't going to be clean. It wasn't going to be controlled. And it definitely wasn't going to be quiet. Because the moment she reached that door, Anderson Cooper was going to say something, something that would change everything. The room didn't move. It felt like it couldn't. Time slowed into something thick and heavy as Meghan Markle stood near the door, her hand hovering just inches from the handle. The studio lights, once soft and neutral, now felt harsh, too bright, too revealing. Every angle exposed. Every movement amplified. Behind the cameras, no one spoke. No one dared. Because something rare was unfolding, something no producer could script, no editor could soften. And in the center of it all, still seated, still composed, was Anderson Cooper. He didn't rush to stop her. He didn't raise his voice. He simply watched. Measured. Calm. Unmoved. "Before you go," he said quietly. 4 words. But they stopped everything. Her hand didn't drop. But it didn't open the door either. A pause stretched between them, thin, fragile, but unbreakable. She turned back slowly. Not fully. Just enough. "What?" she said, her voice tight, controlled, but strained beneath the surface. Anderson stood now. Not abruptly. Not confrontationally. Just, deliberately. "I've been doing this a long time," he began, his voice carrying that same steady tone, but now there was something deeper beneath it. Not frustration. Not anger. Wait. "I've sat across from people accused of things most of us can't even imagine. War crimes. Corruption. Decisions that cost lives." He took a step forward. Not closing the distance aggressively, just enough to be present. "Some of them lied," he continued. "Some of them deflected. But most of them stayed." The words hung there. Heavy. Unavoidable. "And you're leaving," he said. No accusation. Just truth. Her jaw tightened. "I'm leaving because this is hostile," she replied. Anderson tilted his head slightly. "Hostile," he repeated. A pause. "Which part?" he asked. The question lingered. And for the first time since she stood up, there was no immediate answer. Because there wasn't a clear one. "I came here to share my truth," she said finally. "And I asked you about it," Anderson replied. "I don't owe you explanations for everything." "No," he said calmly. "But when you make public claims, especially serious ones, questions come with them." Another step. Still calm. Still controlled. "You can't separate the story from the scrutiny," he continued. "They come together." Her breathing had changed now. Faster. Less controlled. "You don't understand what I've been through," she said, her voice rising slightly. "Then help me understand," he replied immediately. No hesitation. No pause. Just a direct line back to the center of everything. "That's why we're here." Silence. The kind that presses against your chest. Because now, there was nowhere left to go. No prepared line. No softened narrative. No control. Only the truth, or the absence of it. "I have been answering you," she said, but even she seemed to hear the weakness in it. Anderson shook his head slightly. "You've been defending," he said. Not harsh. Not loud. But final. There's a difference. That landed harder than anything before. Because it wasn't about one answer. It was about all of them. Her grip on her bag tightened. "You're twisting everything," she said. "I'm asking you to clarify," he replied. "You're turning this into something it's not." "I'm revealing what it is." That was the moment. The exact moment. Where the space between them stopped being an interview, and became a standoff. Not loud. Not explosive. But absolute. Her eyes locked onto his now, no performance, no softness, no distance. Just raw tension. "You think you've exposed something," she said quietly. Anderson didn't blink. "I think you've shown something," he replied. "A beat. A long one. Every time I asked for specifics, you stepped back," he continued. "Every time I asked for clarity, you redirected. Every time I asked for accountability, you called it an attack." His voice never rose. But it didn't need to. Because now, every word was landing exactly where it needed to. "That's not misunderstanding," he said. "That's avoidance." Her expression shifted, anger now, clearer, sharper. "You're calling me a liar." Anderson paused. Just for a moment. "No," he said. "I'm calling you unwilling to engage." The distinction was subtle. But devastating. Because it couldn't be easily rejected. Couldn't be flipped. Couldn't be escaped. She took a step back toward the door. But this time, it wasn't controlled. It was instinct. "I don't need to stand here and be judged," she said. Anderson nodded once. "You're not being judged," he said. "You're being questioned." A pause. "And those aren't the same thing." The silence that followed felt louder than anything said before. Because now, everything had been stripped down to its simplest form. No narrative. No framing. No performance. Just two people, and the truth sitting between them. "I think we're done," she said again. But this time, it sounded final. Anderson didn't argue. Didn't stop her. Didn't move closer. "That's your choice," he said. Then, just as her hand touched the door, he added one last thing. "Quiet. Measured. Unavoidable. But understand something before you leave." She froze again. Not turning this time. Just listening. "Stories that are true," he said, "don't collapse under questions." The words settled slowly. "They hold up," he continued. "They get clearer. Stronger." A pause. "Yours didn't." That was it. No raised voice. No dramatic gesture. Just a sentence. And somehow, that made it louder than anything else. For a moment, it seemed like she might turn back. Say something. Respond. Fight it. But she didn't. Because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't deepen what had already happened. The door opened. Then closed. Soft. But final. And just like that, it was over. Or at least, it should have been. Because the cameras were still rolling. Anderson stood there for a second longer, staring at the door. Not triumphant. Not satisfied. Just, still. Then slowly, he exhaled and turned back toward the lens. His expression had changed. Not dramatically. But enough. A hint of something heavier behind the calm. "Well," he said quietly. "That was unexpected." A faint shift behind the cameras, someone adjusting, someone breathing again. "In all my years," he continued, "I've rarely had someone walk out." He paused. Choosing his words carefully. "I didn't ask anything extraordinary," he said. "I asked about her own statements. Her own claims. Her own work." Another pause. And when those questions became uncomfortable, the conversation ended. He looked directly into the lens now. Not as an interviewer. But as someone processing what had just happened. "That tells you something," he said. "Not about me. A beat. But about the story." The studio remained silent. Because everyone there knew, this wasn't just another interview. It was something that would be replayed. Analyzed. Debated. Clipped. Shared. Over and over again. Not because of what was said. but because of what couldn't be answered. And somewhere beyond that studio, the world would decide what it all meant. But inside that room, the conclusion had already settled. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But undeniably. Some stories control the spotlight. Until the spotlight starts asking questions. And when it does, not every story survives the light. If you felt the tension in that room, if you saw the moment everything shifted, then you already know, this wasn't just an interview. It was a turning point. So what do you think? Was this real journalism, or did it go too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more deep, cinematic breakdowns of the most intense moments in media, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and share this video. Because the next story might be even bigger.